Hello, St. Anne Parish, and welcome to this week's Quick Things, which is a conversation about probably the most monumental occurrence. But I don't want to speak of it as a historical thing because it's still happening. And that is the Second Vatican Council. Last week, October 11th, marked the 60th anniversary of Pope John the 23rd initiating the first gathering of bishops from around the world who gathered in Rome for what would be a series of gatherings over several years in what is identified as the Second Vatican Ecumenical Council, to use the full name. And the council, as it's generally termed, has become a source of great inspiration for so many of us in the church, but also, and maybe wrongly or for whatever reason, a source of consternation and conflict in some circles as well. It's the kind of thing to talk about the council at 60 years. I told Father Frank Corradi, who's my guest today, it's the kind of thing I said, Frank, would be great to sit around and talk about enjoying a glass of Merlot, which I know is Father Frank's beverage of choice with a good Italian dinner. I don't have Merlot with me, Frank. I don't do you?
No, not yet. It's a little early.
Okay, so Father Frank is no stranger to many of us at St. Anne's. He has filled in at Mass a few times. Those who were part of our reimagining team spent several hours with Father Frank as we initiated the process that led to the renovation of our church and the celebration of the dedication in June. He's a senior priest of our diocese, has been involved in as a pastor, as a chaplain in healthcare administration and guidance. You didn't do education here, Frank, did you? You've been in education, but not in so much in our diocese, right?
No, just doing workshops.
Yeah. Well, and so
on.
I guess we're always educating in some way as pastors too, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
And that's kind of what I wanted. I was trying to think of people I could just have a conversation with about Vatican II, and Frank is someone who came to mind. I guess the challenge here is just where to begin. Frank, would you have what's your first awareness of the council? So the council was convened in 62. It ended in 65? What year were you ordained, Frank?
Well, I was ordained in 88.
Okay.
But I was in religious life.
Right.
In 62, I entered the religious community I belonged to. And my first awareness was this council is going to be called, but it's really not going to change anything. It's just going to be the same old stuff. That was my first thought that I consciously became aware of. And then in 1964, I was a novice and all the changes were beginning to be made. And it was exciting. It was like the whole church was new again. And that continued. I remember in 1965, I was at college in Spring Hill, and we decided we were going to try to do a Latin Mass again. Why we decided, I don't know, but we did. And the awareness that came to me was the choir was doing all the work. And we sang from the beginning to the very end. And there was not a least bit of sense of belonging to that celebration. Anyway,
and I don't want to, I think we often get off track in thinking that the significance of the council pertained to liturgy, because I don't think that was its major contribution. But it's the one, I guess, that we most immediately recognize because of, those, especially those who are aware of the pre-Vatican II Mass. But that was an important component of engaging the entire assembly, that we are all ministers when we come to worship, which we just take for granted now. But it was really a kind of a spectator sport, so to speak.
It was, exactly. You came to Mass. In the Latin Mass, you came to Mass, you entered the pew, you talked to no one, and you either followed the Mass in a missal or you prayed the rosary or had private prayers. But that was it. Then you got up to go to communion and you came back and that was it.
Mhm.
You said nothing.
Yeah. And I think that there's a significance in our engagement in the worship, because I hope by our being engaged in our worship at Mass, we will be more engaged as disciples in living the gospel when we
Yes.
go in peace to love and serve the Lord. I think that
Exactly.
that's the big contribution to the changes in the liturgy.
Yeah, the liturgy becomes then, the way we do it now, it becomes formative of our spiritual life and of our life in the world.
Yeah.
And if you go back to what John the 23rd said, really what he wanted the council to do was to help us to know how to engage the world. And I think that's what we have lost. I think we're still too, it is the American church, we're still too focused on our inner life, if you will, the life of the Roman Catholics, rather than seeing ourselves as coming together for Eucharist in order to be formed for the life of the world, to bring the gospel to the world. I think that's what Vatican II wanted to do in its most dynamic understanding.
And I think certainly that was Pope John the 23rd's vision too, is that the church had to become more engaged with the world.
Right.
You
Exactly.
used the idea that everything was new. He used the word aggiornamento, like bringing up to date, but making new in some way. He
Right.
talked about opening the windows of the church to let in some fresh air. And certainly I think the council did that, but I think there's always seems to be a compulsion to close the windows.
Yes.
That we're allowing in too much fresh air.
And I think historically, the pre-Vatican II church was a reactionary church to the Protestant Reformation, the Industrial Revolution, the Enlightenment, all of those things that seemed to be militating against, and really was militating against the church. But we weren't able to open up the wagons, if you will, and to get out from our protective coating. I remember as a young person, I had no friends that were not Catholic. We went to Catholic schools. We associated mainly with Catholics in our neighborhood. We couldn't even join the Y because it was not considered a Catholic, shall we say, Catholic friendly. So it was a ghetto. It was a real ghetto.
And some of that was due to discrimination against Catholics when people immigrated to the United States. There was hostility to people because of ethnic backgrounds or religious backgrounds. So to some degree, those ghettos, that Catholic ghetto that you described, there was really no option at one time, but also as we were moving into the 60s and then beyond,
Yes.
It became more protective, or
yes,
isolationist in some way.
I would say that was the 50s.
Yeah.
When I was a teenager, it was very protective, and it was very much a ghetto. And the immigrant church caused that too.
Sure.
Some of that had to be.
Well, and of course, canon law didn't encourage fraternization among Catholics and Lutherans or Catholics or anybody else.
That's right.
Which were also major results of the council, in that we recognized that people of other Christian traditions were Christian.
That's right.
We didn't.
God love them too. God
bless my mother, but she will never stop talking about how much to her chagrin, that she had to be baptized again when she married my dad.
Yep.
I mean,
That
it
was
was just, you what? That was common.
That was common.
So it's just shocking to think of that now, but, and that's how it was. You know, not only that we would have, I mean, there were people from other denominations at the council,
Yeah, that's right.
you know, that was probably revolutionary in its own way.
Yeah.
What, well, I guess we've talked a little bit. What do you think are the most, what are misunderstandings of the council?
Well, I think the fact that when we think about the council, we think only about liturgy. I think that's a poor development, because I think the council was much more than that. I think it was, as I said, a way of framing how the church could move into the world, how it could engage the world. Instead of, and as there was a quote in one of these readings that you sent me that struck me, and I don't know if I can find it. I think the gist of it was that the church was meant to be, in a sense, the servant of the world. It was meant to bring the goodness of the gospel to the world, and we had not done that, I don't think. And so the big challenge was missed, I think, because we got bogged down in, I don't know how to put it, certainly not irrelevant things, but not the core of what the council was trying to say.
Part of that, do you think part of that struggle there is that there's always been this seeming struggle of those who were kind of resisting what the council was trying to encourage? I heard a critique of the council in that they blamed the media for creating this tension between left, for lack of better terms, this tension between left and right. But the reality is that from even before the gathering of the first bishops, there was this tension within the Curia in Rome over those who were on board with John the 23rd and those who were going to do everything they could to prevent anything significant. I mean, your point of being rather cynical about anything coming from the council, Frank, was kind of, you know, that's just how it always was. I mean, those who were in power in Rome were not going to let things open up, for lack of a better phrase.
That's right. That's absolutely true. And I can vaguely remember reading about those things in the newspaper, about that tension, or other sources, that tension between the Curia and those who wanted to follow John the 23rd.
And unfortunately, that tension continues to this day. You know,
it does.
All too clearly.
And I think that's why Pope Francis's message is not being heard, because we can't get beyond this tension between, I don't know I guess tension between right and left. You know, he's really saying we need to transcend that. We need to remember that we are, one of these articles, remember that we are brothers and sisters, not political opponents. And I don't know how you get there.
Well, you know, he's taken a lot of heat for his decision to kind of rein in the Tridentine Mass, the Mass that was celebrated prior to the council. And his point on that is that the council fathers never intended that there would be two rites of the church, multiple rites beyond what was in existence at that time. And so to be a true church guided by the Second Vatican Council, we can't have these separate rites.
Right, exactly.
And that if we can't be united in our worship, then how are we going to be united in pursuing what you're talking about in terms of going into the world?
And I think it's also necessary to understand that the the liturgy of pre-Vatican II church that I grew up with was not isolated. It was part of a culture and a matrix of what it meant to be Catholic. And that matrix doesn't exist anymore. And to identify with that way of worshiping is to say, this is really the way, this whole matrix, if you will, is what the church should be. And the council is saying, no, we have to move beyond that.
Mhm.
We have to fashion a new way that will engage us with the world.
I don't think people realize that a council is the ultimate authority. I mean, the ultimate form of church teaching.
That's right.
So these documents that were given to us by the council, they are of greater significance. I don't know if they take on greater significance than like an encyclical or something.
Oh, I think they do.
Yeah.
And I think they,
The highest teaching authority of the church, I think, is a council.
is a council. Yes.
Yeah.
And that's why I think we need to look at those 4 documents that he recommends that we read and study in preparation for the holy year of 2025.
Pope Francis has recommended.
Yes.
I would imagine those would be the Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy, Constitution on Divine Revelation, Constitution on the Church,
On the
and
church.
Constitution on the Church in the Modern World.
Right. Those 4 are the heart of really what the council taught.
So if you were still a pastor, Frank, would you initiate
Yes,
gathering to review and discuss
I
them?
would, yes. And I would start with the one on the church.
Lumen Gentium.
Yeah.
Yeah. And conclude with Church in the Modern World.
Yes.
Yeah.
And not spend much time on liturgy because we've beaten that to death. But the other 3, I think, should be looked at.
Correct. Going to what we were talking about. Well, go ahead, Frank.
No, if I were pastor, that I would set that up. Yes, but
Okay.
I'm not. So
Well, I am. So I could do that.
I hope you do.
You mentioned Pope Francis and some of his remarks on the anniversary of the council's first gathering. He, in his homily that day, said, "A church in love with Jesus has no time for quarrels, gossip, and disputes.
Yep.
May God free us from being critical and intolerant, harsh and angry. This is not a matter of style, but of love. Let us not give in to enticements or temptation of polarization." He says, how often in the wake of the council did Christians prefer to choose sides in the church, not realizing that they were breaking their mother's heart, the heart of their mother.
Yes. Yeah, that's a wonderful phrase.
But don't be on the side, don't be on the right or the left, rather than be on the side of Jesus.
That's right. And the interesting thing is that as a person who experienced the old church, we could disagree among ourselves about things in the church. But when the church spoke, we listened and we followed. And that's why when I read that article in the New York Times, I thought to myself, there lies the issue. The church no longer has that kind of authority, at least in the United States. We're critical of everything. And if it doesn't suit our ideas, we tend to reject it. And I think that's what's led us to this tremendous division.
True, but also one of the benefits of the council is that we have the ability to have this discourse over matters of the church,
Yes.
which wouldn't have existed prior to the council.
Exactly. And I agree with that.
Yeah.
And the thing that gives me great hope is this whole synodality that Francis is talking about. The church that walks together and talks together and maybe even fights together, but eventually comes to a common understanding and acceptance of each person and all the various ideas, but comes to a direction as to where it wants to go. It takes time,
Yeah.
it takes patience, and it's a new way of doing things, and it's going to take a long time for that to happen.
Well, and to that point, Pope Francis announced on Sunday that he's extending the synod process another year to 2024, just so that there can be more
That's right.
consultation and conversation. You know, I'll be honest, I don't know quite where the synodal process is going and how this is all going to create some kind of clear vision. But at the same time, it is kind of exciting to allow for this consultation and conversation to occur.
It really says that all people in the church are equal. It's no longer clergy telling laity what to do. It's now all of us listening to each other and trying to see where the Spirit is calling us. To me, that's really healthy.
Right. Well, I hope so. It certainly seems that it should be, right?
Should be. Yeah.
So there were two articles that I've read in the past week or so that talked about whether the council was a failure. So I guess maybe, and just to kind of begin wrapping up our conversation, Frank, how would you assess that? I know what I don't.
No, I don't think it was a failure. I think the problems that we have seen, I want to say, are cultural problems. That just as the council was coming into effect, our American culture was coming apart. We were challenging all the institutions and the morality and everything that we had known since the end of World War II. That was all beginning to change. And then those who criticized the council, I think, said, well, this was, these cultural things were caused by the council. Well, no, the lack of acceptance, I think, was caused by the cultural changes that we were seeing, radical cultural changes we were seeing. So I don't think we have failed. Watching this present Pope and this whole synodality thing, I think it's just beginning.
Well, yes. And that's my answer to the question of whether the council is a failure or not. Well, it's too soon to tell. And there's no way it's a failure. The council is a work of the Holy Spirit, as it had. I mean, Pope John made that clear on day one, that this was going to be the Spirit was going to control this exercise.
That's right. That's right.
So we don't ever say that the Spirit is done. I heard Cardinal Dolan the other day, Timothy Dolan from New York, say that he says in history, he's a church historian, he said historically it takes councils 3 generations before they're really implemented or on track. Well, there haven't been enough councils, I don't think, to have a generational plotting like that. But in terms of this council, we are only now on the 3rd generation.
That's right.
And so that it's still a work in progress.
They say 100 years.
Okay.
Before it even gets, somewhat implemented.
Well, in earlier times, it would have taken several generations for the word to get out.
That's right, exactly.
That was it. Go just to step back a little bit. I mean, that's the amazing thing about the Second Vatican Council, is that the world was really in rapture with what's going on in Rome.
That's right.
All the networks had reporters there. The New York Times the New Yorker magazine had a regular columnist who it was a pseudonym, Xavier Rid. It was really a Redemptorist priest who didn't want to be known because he didn't want to mess up his sources and stuff like that. But the world was really hanging on what was happening there.
It was. I remember that very clearly. It was kind of amazing.
Yeah, to look back at that, when I was in the seminary, I did an independent study on how the Second Vatican Council was covered by media, which was interesting to explore. So yeah, to whether it's a failure or not, it is still a work in progress. And
it is, yeah. And I'll never see where it ends up, and you probably won't either.
Right. Well, and I don't think it ends up anywhere.
No,
I mean,
right.
I hope
Yeah.
that those documents that we look forward to studying here at St. Anne in the next year or so, and that as we strive to live out the vision of the council, Pope John Paul VI, John Paul II, Pope Francis, how all of that continues is what will give the church life and give us life by being engaged in the world. Our life doesn't come from what we do for 1 hour on Sunday. That gives us life and encourages us
That's right.
to go forward. But
That's the vision. That's the vision that we need to take to the world.
Right. And that's the lesson of the council.
Yep.
To be a church of the world,
That's right.
immersed in the world. Yeah.
Exactly.
So those are our walking orders, our mission. And that kind of goes to the concluding prayer that I have. Well, even the prayer itself, Frank, I'm taking this from one of the Eucharistic prayers for masses for various needs and occasions, which would never have existed without the council.
That's
The
right.
council opened the door to different not interpretations, but to allow us to bring different sense of prayer, different focus of prayer to the liturgy. Prior to the council, there was one Eucharistic prayer at Mass, the canon. You didn't deviate at all from that.
The Roman canon, that was it.
Yeah. And now we have, my goodness, 10, 11, 12 different Eucharistic prayers that we can use at Mass. And this is one of them. So thank you, Frank, for being with us. I'm going to conclude with this prayer.
My pleasure.
I can find it here. Oh, where did I lose it? There we go. Gracious God, keep your church alert in faith to the signs of the times and eager to accept the challenge of the gospel. Open our hearts to the needs of all humanity, so that sharing their grief and anguish, their joy and hope, we may faithfully bring them the good news of salvation and advance together on the way to your kingdom. Lead us all to the fullness of the resurrection and gladden us one day with the light of your face. We pray through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.